Dear colleagues, dear friends, welcome. This is the first research seminar of our project entitled Turkey as a Challenge and Partner in European Security. This project is a joint project of International Relations Council of Turkey, Center for International and European Studies at Kadir Has University, and Institute of International Relations at Pantheon University, Athens. The project is funded by Center for Applied Turkish Studies at CVP Berlin. Today, 4 of our experts will be sharing their research findings on the following 2 thematic areas of the project. First one, EU-Turkey relations and the impact of the Brexit, and the second one, exploring the Turkey-EU-Russia triangle. After the presentations, we will have time for short question and answer session. For question and answer session, please write your questions at the chat box. After the presentations, we will read the questions to the experts and give time to them to answer. Before giving floor to our speakers, I would like to invite Professor Mustafa Aydın to introduce the project. Hocam, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bezen. Actually, you gave quite a bit of information, which is very good. This was almost a year and a half now in cooking as a project. We started discussing the issues between Dimitrios, myself, and Constantinos as 3 co-managers of the project when Center for Applied Studies of Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik was established or was created 2 years ago. Of course, the title of the project, Turkey as a Partner and Challenge for European Security, begs explanation a little bit. Turkey has always been, in a sense, partner and challenge to Europe, not only in the security aspect, but in many other areas. This is not something not new. It is maybe centuries old quest. Turkey's duality and dual identity vis-a-vis Europe. However, we felt that the recent changes, the number of different changes since the end of the Cold War, but even more recently with the Arab uprisings and then regional challenges around Turkey, and also domestic political changes in Turkey, maybe as well as the changes the European Union has been experiencing in recent years, have necessitated a new look, or at least fresh look, for Turkey-EU relations. One of the aspects of this project, or novel aspects of this project, was not only we re-looking into the Turkey-EU relations, but we are also doing it with Greeks and Turks. Greeks and Turks have worked together in a number of projects. I've been, and Dimitrios and Constantinos have been part of some similar projects, but usually many projects bring Greeks and Turkish thinkers and academics together to think about Turkish-Greek relations. And they have produced a number of books, articles, publications, and various other reports and etc. over the years. However, I think as far as I know, or as far as we know, this is the first time that a group of Turks and group of Greeks are coming together to talk about Turkish-EU relations and look into the different aspects of that relations and trying to see what are the dynamics, at least the current dynamics of that relationship. And of course, our focus is on the one hand, try to see what are the challenges to move forward for that relationship, but also what are the aspects of partnership between Turkey and the Europe to go forward from here. There are various topics that we are covering, and we are going to cover more in this project, running from counterterrorism to energy issues, from migration to impact of the Brexit, from boundary issues to security aspects and everything. So we are trying to cover holistically all aspects of Turkish-EU relations. And finally, as a result of this project, we'll be writing one joint recommendation or policy paper, let's say, trying to come up with various recommendations for alternative recommendations for various players on the ground in Turkey-EU connection. This is one of the first webinars that we are going to host within this project, and Bezen will give you further details. We are starting with 2 of the papers that has already been finished already. Next week we'll have another one, 2 more papers, then maybe a kind of a summer break, small summer break, and then we'll restart again trying to present all the papers to wider public. And finally, we'll come up with another final webinar, most probably, to discuss the final conclusions of the project. So let me just, without going too much further, let me just thank a number of institutions who are contributing to this project. Of course, the CATS network, Center for Applied Studies network, is a very important and valuable partner in this project, which are also sponsoring the whole project. And CATS itself is the product of Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik in Berlin, which is in return sponsored by Mercator Stiftung and German Federal Foreign Office. So this is an initiative of within that whole structure. Among ourselves, the 3 institutions, International Relations Council of Turkey, Center for International and European Studies at Kadir Has University, and also Institute of International Relations at Pantheon University in Athens, are the 3 collaborators. And I have to thank these 3 institutions coming up this joint project and pursuing for its fruition. And finally, Constantinos is here, one of my co-managers of the project, and Dimitris Triantafylou is one of the attendees. So I have to thank them. And giving the floor to Bezen, I also like to thank our current speakers and authors of the papers, Harry, Çiğdem, Evren, and Constantinos. Let me give you floor to Bezen back, and have a nice meeting.
Thank you for the introduction of the project. Now, I would like to give floor first to Harry Papasotiriou from Institute of International Relations at Pantheon University, then Çiğdem Üstün from Nişantaşı University. They will present their research inquiring EU-Turkey relations and the impact of Brexit. So each speaker will have 10 minutes. When you up to your time, I will let you know. Harry, please, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be working with Kadir Has, which I visited a few years ago with a group of researchers. Now, I'll begin with a Greek perspective on the EU-Turkey relationship. Let me say that in the late 1990s, Greece decided to help Turkey get into the EU. And the idea was that this would allow Greece and Turkey to overcome the differences and be in a more cooperative relationship. The EU, or originally the European Economic Community, was created after the Second World War, largely to overcome French and German rivalries. This helped overcome French and Polish rivalries, long-standing historic conflicts that went back centuries. Now, the Greek approach worked well at the beginning of the first years of Mr. Erdogan's prime ministership, when Turkey did really major steps to Europeanize, improve its democracy, adopt the acquis communautaire, the European law. But since then, the last 10 years or so, things have not gone well, particularly after the failed coup. And at the moment, Turkey's moving away from the EU, pursuing a foreign policy that is largely identified with the Muslim Brotherhood. That's not a European orientation. Right? Now, a few years ago, several people in Greece, including myself, we concluded that since Turkey's accession to the EU is not likely under the current circumstance, that an alternative would be some kind of special relationship that would anchor Turkey near the EU until things change in Turkey and under different leadership, Turkey goes back on the road towards moving towards the EU. Now, if you want a special relationship, it's easy to do this in the security realm, because CFSP, the Common Foreign Security Policy, is based on unanimity. It's not based on majority vote, as in other issue areas. The European Parliament does not have much to say because it's based on unanimity. Therefore, it's largely intergovernmental. And if you have 27 governments taking decisions, then you can add another one, make it 28 or 29, right? Find it some structured, focused way to create this relationship. And since it's based on unanimity, no state is threatened to lose something. I mean, they can always veto. So it's easy to arrange special relationship with Turkey. Now this becomes perhaps not at the moment, but sometime in the future, it might become more likely that something like this will be adopted because of Brexit. Brexit has two impacts on Europe's security situation. The one is that it weakens the military capabilities. Britain had the largest defense budget in the European Union. So, and it also has a lot of capabilities, specialized capabilities in electronic surveillance, unmanned aircraft, and so on, where it was much ahead of any other European EU member. On the other hand, Brexit makes more likely that the Europeans will do further steps towards more integration. But it seems almost certain that the UK will continue to cooperate with the EU or with member states like France on security matters because there is such an interrelationship that developed over long periods of time. France and the UK have been cooperating since Seymour Law in 1998, the agreement between the leaders at the time. And after Brexit was voted in the referendum, in the last few years, the EU and Britain have reaffirmed that, Britain and France have reaffirmed that they want to continue the relationship in the defense sphere. Then there is Britain's participation also in the Galileo space project. Again, it's such a close linkage that it's difficult to see Britain moving away. When it comes to PESCO, the permanent structured cooperation that the EU has been running for some time, agreements were made in the last 2 years to have a third-party arrangements, third parties participate in PESCO. And also Britain is likely to participate in ad hoc missions regarding anti-piracy, anti-terrorism, and so on. Now, we don't know exactly the form that the relationship will take between the EU and Britain, but it will create a precedent, it will create a formula, a prototype. And this is what then we would like to suggest that Turkey follow. It's not realistic now, right? I'm not talking about the current situation. But if we have a formula ready, as an aspiration, as a goal, once the situation in Turkey changes, then this is a guideline for the pro-European forces in Turkey, something that they can support and unite behind, is a step towards an eventual accession. As I said, the accession now doesn't look at all possible, but it's sometime in the future where I really hope that Turkey will go back to the road towards Europe, move away from the Muslim Brotherhood and all that. And then we will have a formula to make a first step. So that was how we saw with Çiğdem, the Brexit, the opportunities it created. On the first hand, the EU could use Turkey's military capabilities and its geopolitical scope, crucial areas, because Britain is out. But on the other hand, also Brexit is likely to create a new formula about how a third party, a non-member, can have a security relationship with the EU structure and long-lasting. It's a first step towards what we eventually hope will happen, which is Turkey's accession in the EU. Right. Okay, that's my part. And Çiğdem now can continue.
Okay, thank you, Harry, for explaining the complexities and the opportunity that Brexit created for Turkish-EU relations. Now it's your turn, Çiğdem. So the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, in our paper, first we are looking at what Brexit meant, and then what were the debates with the Brexit and the security and defense cooperation. And Harry did give the aspect there. So I am going to focus on the more Turkish part and see whether this would create a good opportunity for the cooperation as it is hoped. When we look at the Brexit and the security and defense cooperation field, we're seeing that UK is an important partner, as Harry already said, that it is important that UK and EU cooperation goes on in the field. So there was a mutual understanding there already that the UK and EU should be cooperating in this field, in the PESCO projects and so on. Well, and then it has been several times, as Harry was saying, elaborated that this may be a model for Turkey-EU relations, and it can create a model for all of us. But the main problem, first of all, with this is that the relations between EU and UK and the relations between Turkey and EU are not the same. There is a growing criticism of the EU on Turkey. The issues arising from the Eastern Mediterranean is a concern in the relations, not only between the European Union and Turkey, but also between EU member states and Turkey in the bilateral relations too. So there are various differences, and in cooperation in PESCO, we are seeing that the third country participation regulations are already set, and there are some concerns over there as well in terms of Turkey's participation in the PESCO projects. So the relations are different in that sense. Well, after Brexit, of course, this differentiated integration, the idea of this differentiated integration became more popular. I mean, it is not new. I mean, we know that this was on the table for such a long time. It was called special relationship, or some other names we have seen, not only for Turkey, but also in terms of future of Europe, the shape that the European Union would get, the differentiated integration was being discussed. But with Brexit, it became more popular these days.
Çiğdem, you're frozen. Okay. Let's wait a couple of minutes for Çiğdem. I think she's just lost connection.
She goes out and comes in again.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know.
This is the problem of all webinars.
ahead.
So maybe if we have questions about Brexit and its impact on the Turkey-EU relations, maybe we can get a few questions in the meantime while we were waiting, Çiğdem.
Here's a question, but I think it's more appropriate for the
Yes,
next.
yes, this is about Ukraine and Black Sea and
It's more for the next group.
Yeah. Maybe you can continue, Harry.
Well, the argument is that the EU ought to do more to try to bring Turkey back on the road towards the EU, particularly in regards to human rights abuses or other problems that have become worse after the failed coup, and that have moved Turkey away from the EU standards when it comes to the quality of a democracy, human rights. That the EU should be more active in helping Turkey or helping the pro-democracy forces.
Yeah. Çiğdem,
So
okay, Çiğdem.
I am back. For some reason my internet connection was gone all of a sudden. So I am sorry. I am sorry for the interruption. So what I was saying is that Brexit made this differentiated integration more popular topic. So, well, Turkey has already been participating in the EU operations in this field. Turkey also showed its interest in PESCO, and it is expected. It already applied to participate in the PESCO, in one of the PESCO projects. So in the literature, we have seen there is a big emphasis on the commonalities in the shared neighborhood, interests, joint interests, and priorities in the foreign policy would be similar to each other. So we have seen these. Also, in this aspect, in this shared neighborhood, there were all these suggestions that Turkey should participate in the institutions without voting rights, or without full participation in the operations, and so on. So again, once again, as we have. Some of us may remember at the end of the 1990s, also Turkey's geopolitical importance and geostrategic importance was on the table, and it was very much debated. We are seeing this emphasis once more. But there are some differences, and I will come to that. Well, some of the suggestions that we have seen also included the UK and Turkey in this after Brexit, UK and Turkey cooperating more intensely, and then this would open an window of opportunity for Turkey to cooperate with the European Union in security and defense fields. So this is also in the literature. This was suggested by Sinan Ülgen. And in all of these scenarios, in all these future scenarios, the risk is that what we have seen with Harry as well is that we are talking about the interests. We are emphasizing the interest so much that the normative actorness of the European Union, or the norms and the values, or these liberal values that we have been talking about, we are not referring to them anymore. So taking Brexit as an example and creating a structured mechanism, taking that as a model, has a risk of forgetting the normative actorness of the European Union in this sense. In regional issues, in terms of Brexit, the United Kingdom and Turkey have at several times emphasized that cooperation will go on. Even though Turkey, in the Brexit rhetoric, Turkey was used in UK. In the foreign affairs, this seems like there isn't much a negative impact on that. So yes, with Brexit, there is a non-EU but NATO member creating a new model of relationship with the European Union. So yes, this may be a good example. This may be a model for Turkey-EU relations. Yes, we need a structured mechanism. Yes, we need a structured cooperation mechanism. All these ad hoc cooperation mechanisms, they are transactional and they are not really deepening the relationships, but we are only focusing on the mechanisms. Yes, Turkey's geopolitical importance is important. Nobody can really say it is not. And yes, it is on the table too. But now, in terms of this geopolitical importance and the military capabilities, assets, NATO is something that we should never forget. And the NATO-EU cooperation has big obstacles, and until the Cyprus issue is resolved, it doesn't look very likely that NATO and the European Union will be able to cooperate. There are vetoes on the table. So there are all these positive aspects and the negative aspects. Another mechanism that we have looked at is this European intervention initiative, that this is supposed to bring NATO and EU states together outside the NATO and outside the EU mechanisms. So this may create, this may give actors an area for maneuver. So this is also a possibility where Turkey can cooperate with UK and the EU member states outside NATO and outside EU structures in the security and defense field. But so this may bypass the obstacles that we have in NATO-EU cooperation, maybe. So this is one of the suggestions that we have in the paper. But in whatever we are talking about, whatever format that we are talking about, we keep underlining the importance of the values and the normative norms and values, this normative actorness. If we are going to turn this into a more interest-based, pragmatic, transactional, whatever you call that kind of relationship, then in the future it may be more difficult to share the same values, not only in EU-Turkey relations, but this is also important for the whole neighborhood. It is not only an issue that is affecting Turkey and the European Union in that sense. So this is all from me. I am sorry for the internet disconnection in the middle.
Thank you both for sharing your outcomes and recommendations of your research with us. It was one of the papers I wrote, I read first among all papers, and your recommendations are really valuable for a future cooperation between the EU and Turkey. So we will see whether they listen your recommendations or not. So I'm sure the audience has questions about the topic, but we need to wait by the end of the second presentations. Please write your questions to question and answer box. Now I give floor first to Evren Balta from Özyeğin University, and then Constantinos Filis from Institute of International Relations at Pantheon University to present their research exploring the Turkey-Russia-EU triangle. And let me remind that Evren and Constantinos wrote this paper together with Mustafa Aydın, but today Constantinos and Evren will present the paper. So each speaker will have 10 minutes. Evren, please, the floor is yours now.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having us here today. And let me talk about a little bit what we have done in the paper, and then summarize some of our findings. And I'll be mostly talking about the first two parts of the paper, and maybe then leave some of the findings to Constantinos. What we have done is that we discussed three different context of Turkey, EU, and Russia triangle. The first one was the normative context, where we looked at the different threat perceptions, ontological security concerns, and how this shaped, how these ontological security issues have shaped this triangle, basically. Because throughout the paper, we are basically arguing that this relationship between Turkey and Russia can never be understood without the fact or without the input that's coming from the West, specifically from the EU. So there's always a third party in this bilateral relationship, which is EU. And as I said, in the first part, we looked at the normative context. And in the second part, we looked at Turkey and Russia as security providers, both to each other and also to the Europe. And finally, we looked at the one of the most important issues in this triangle, again, is the energy context, because Russia has been the major energy provider of both Russia and Turkey, and this also includes the pipelines, which we also argued that shapes the geopolitics of Europe in a great extent. So maybe I should just talk about a little bit about the normative context, and then even shorter about security context and the context that the security factors that affect this relationship between Russia and Turkey, and not gonna, and leave the energy to Constantinos, and maybe he may add some of the some issue or some comments in both contexts as well. We basically argued that three factors have been important in shaping Turkish-Russian relationship. The first one is their perception of ontological security, and we have argued that their similarity in terms of ontological security have played a crucial role in the formation of their external alliances. And that ontological security issues is the fact that both countries believe what we called that they are living in a country that is made of glass. In other words, this high perception of fragile, being a fragile, territorially fragile and vulnerable culturally is very important in terms of their security cultures. They both believe that external actors are sort of fueling domestic instability in their countries. We call it SEV syndrome in the case of Turkey, a similar but not named syndrome in the case of Russia. And they are very suspicious in both contexts. Both actors are very suspicious about the intentions of the West, intentions of the EU, and this and that. So this has both historical and contemporary roots, but this is one of the factors that drives these two countries towards each other. The second factor that affected or shaped the relationship between these two countries is that both countries basically believe that there are special powers, unique powers, with reference to their imperial histories, there being great powers in the history and this and that. And therefore, if we look at if we focus on the current period, contemporary period, as realist theories predict, when opportunities arise, they try to enhance their capabilities, grab the opportunities, strengthen their influence in the international system. And in the last decade, both states have seen such an opportunity rising in both regionally and globally. Finally, as I said in the beginning of my presentation, the third factor that shaped this relationship is the role of the West, and their patterns of interaction with the West. This has been again true for the last 2 centuries. As I said, West has always been a major component in this bilateral relationship, and the relationship between Russia and Turkey greatly changed, transformed the Western security structure and culture too. But if we focus again on the current contemporary period, both countries believe that the rapprochement between the 2 countries is basically or partly as a result of, we argued, the inability of the Western actors to implement a greater continental unification strategy, or to countering these concerns of these 2 countries. And basically being non-present in the region as a security provider, we have argued that played a very important role in this relationship. There are also differences. Let me focus on a little bit on the differences and then stop there. We focused. We have argued in the paper that although the similarities basically shape the relationship and play the role of a push factor that is drawing these 2 countries together, there are very important differences in terms of their institutions, security institutions, or the threat perceptions. In terms of the security institutions, Turkey's security institutions are still deeply attached to the Western security architecture. And despite the problems, we also point out the problems, the transatlantic alliance still provides Turkey with irreplaceable regional and global deterrence, and we have argued that Turkey is not ready to give away this deterrence capacity. In fact, Turkey uses this deterrence capacity to balance Russia, and also uses Russia to balance the transatlantic institutions or alliance. So Russia plays a very important role in terms of this balancing strategy for Turkey, and Turkey plays an important role for Russia to balance the West and the US and their regional influence. So we have argued that in terms of this balancing strategy is a very delicate strategy in that sense, which may in the future create some fissures between the 2 countries. There are also differences, as I said, in the way that these 2 states see their role and let me say just the role or their existence in the world politics, in terms of the opposition to the international institutions or the global future imagined by the West, and this and that. But the opposition of Russia is basically a struggle for it's more of an alternative. Let me say differently. It's more of an alternative vision to the West's rule-based international system or liberal international system, and which Russia often calls to going back to the 1945 system, and argues that in the last 2 decades, this system has really collapsed and we need to really revoke the system. Although Turkey has some sort of opposition to the system, it's basically power-based, not principle-based. So even though the Russia's opposition is more, principle-based, sovereignty and this and that, Russia is in the case of Turkey, it's basically world is bigger than the 5, and we should be one of the most important actors in this regard. So in that sense, their opposition to the global system, to the international system, or liberal international system, or transatlantic alliance is different. Finally, I'll stop here. Their threat perception is different, which we think is one of the major fissures between these 2 countries. Even though their threat perceptions has been different, this wasn't a major obstacle to bring them together. And one of the reasons for this coming together is basically they needed each other, even though as I underline again, they do have different threat perceptions. For Turkey, in the last decade, specifically with regard to Syria and Iraq, and given that in Russia, in Syria, Russia and Turkey collaborates extensively, it's basically Kurdish transnationalism. And for Russia, it's basically Islamic transnationalism. So this difference between Turkey focusing on Kurdish transnationalism, Russia focusing on Islamic transnationalism is one of the major differences. But as I said, Turkey needed Russia to counterbalance the Kurdish-US cooperation, and Russia needed Turkey to reshape the Assad opposition. So this was basically a need-based collaboration and coming together. However, even in Syria, where again, as we see a lot of extensive cooperation between Russia and Turkey, each side kept pursuing their own agendas. They had major conflicts in Idlib. They are still having conflicts. Even today, the conflict between Russia and Turkey was in the news. So there is a huge fissure between the two countries. Russia kept lending political support to Kurds. Russia kept underlining the fact that Turkey cannot remain in Syria and has to live once the Syrian territory is consolidated under Assad's rule. And Turkey kept its relationship with the opposition, used it as a leverage against Russia. So this is a delicate balance. What hold them together in Syria, in the region, was their desire to balance the other powers, specifically the power of the US and the West. And also what really drove together is the lack of the EU in the region. And they needed some sort of stability and to some kind of an order. So in order to create that order, quote unquote, of course, they needed each other. And the question here is that whether we are coming to an end of this collaboration. Thanks.
Thank you, Evren. Now I give floor to you, Constantinos, to continue the Russia-Turkey-EU triangle discussion.
Thanks, Bezen, and thank you for all your precious support throughout these months of cooperating with you and with Mustafa and Kadir Has University and the rest of the partners. And I would like, of course, to thank Evren not only for her contribution on the paper, but also for facilitating my work, because I'm going to be very brief. She very thoroughly described our paper. I'm going to focus on four issues. First, on the broader picture, then on energy, then on whether the Russia-Turkey relationship is strategic, and at last, I will share with you some of our recommendations. We are living in a complex and world where the Eastern powers, including China, Russia, and Turkey, believe that we are moving towards a post-Western world, a world where the West is not dominant. The Eastern powers believe that the West is in an extended crisis, if not decline. And in this contemporary world, diplomacy is no longer necessarily exercised in an institutional manner through multilateral or supranational organizations. So we have transactional diplomacy that is prevailing. This means transactions without necessarily terms, without rules, without conditions. And diplomacy based mainly on what a leader believes at a given moment is the narrow national economic trade interest of his country. And this, of course, does not go only for Eastern countries, but we had, of course, the example of Mr. Trump when he served as president of the US. But we are talking about a multilateral world that requires joint actions and synergies. In today's world, the state, no matter how powerful it is, cannot decide on its own and impose its positions on a large geographical scale. So it is not coincidence that not just China, but also other regional powers, such as Russia, Turkey, Iran, India, Pakistan, are pursuing greater autonomy of movement in their immediate region. Now, regarding the energy issue, which Evren said that we have extensively analyzed in our paper, here there are some discrepancies, and there are some issues that need to be stressed. First, on the one hand, the EU seeks diversification after the two energy crises between Russia and Ukraine. The EU is asking for more diversification in the sense of diversifying, multiplying its choices and finding alternative sources to Russia. But this has not yet been the case. At the same time, we have the biggest economy of the EU, that is Germany, which is still cooperating with Russia. We all know what has happened with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And despite the pressures from the previous US administration, how Germany decided to proceed with Nord Stream 2. And we had some good news for the Germans and the Russians coming from the Biden administration with regard to who is going to be sanctioned and not as to that project. But of course, at the same time, member states of the EU, which are geographically located in the eastern parts of the European Union and are in close proximity to Russia, they perceive Moscow as a much greater threat based on the historical and contemporary security issues, while countries in Western and Central Europe do not consider Russia as such and favor developing closer energy and economic relations with Moscow. And of course, I highlighted the example of Nord Stream and Germany, which, by the way, although the Europeans wanted, at least at the very beginning, to support Ukraine against Russia, finally, with Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines, which are both bypassing Ukraine, in a way, the Europeans and especially the Germans, they provide, of course, support to Russia, and they do accept and recognize the role that Russia has and will have in EU's energy equation. And it is true that up until now, and given that Iran is marginalized and Iran is directed to the Asian market, there are no options which, even if we add them up, can only be supplementary options to Russian natural gas. The other interesting issue is that Turkey, at the same time, has been perceived as the key state, the key transit state, the Ukraine of the South, in making sure that all projects bypassing Russia were going to cross Turkish territory. Of course, there is an exception here with regard to the Eastern Mediterranean because of the strained relations between Turkey and most Eastern Mediterranean countries. But when it comes to projects deriving from Azerbaijan, maybe in the future from Iran, from Kurdish Iraq, and other Eastern, even from Turkmenistan, then Turkey is the key transit state for delivering natural gas, which is not going to be Russian, to the European market. What needs to be stressed, and Evren mentioned that in her speech as well, is that despite the apparent strengthening of bilateral ties between Turkey and Russia, both have been unable to develop their partnership of convenience, this marriage of convenience, into a more integrated, comprehensive one. Instead, their relationship, although it does have some strategic characteristics since they cooperate on the energy field, on the military defense sector field, they, of course, have multiplied their trade transactions, etc. Still, their relationship seems, at least to us, to be a big extent transactional. Let me add here that one of the reasons being the fact that even today, both Russia and Turkey need the US particularly, maybe not the EU so much, but I would include the EU as well, more than they need each other. So we just have to bear that in mind, and this is a defining factor in how their relationship is going to be developed in the future. But at the same time, we must underline that despite the lack of a shared vision between Russia and Turkey for the Middle East, North Africa, the Black Sea, even the Caucasus, their bilateral relationship has been resilient despite repeated crises and despite the fact that they have disagreed with each other. To make a long story short, both states, both Russia and Turkey, are regarded by many Europeans as challenges, by some Europeans as a threat as well, as threats, but they need to be managed with the use of carrots and sticks. And they are, of course, important partners of Europe and for the European Union in terms of trade, energy, security, not least, of course, terrorism, environment, international politics. So the EU cannot and should not, and actually is not ignoring either Russia or Turkey, but what we were looking for and what we're looking for in our paper is how can we engage more with Russia and Turkey. So, and I'm going to conclude with that, Bezen. First, Syria. Russia and Turkey, they are the main players in Syria, of course, Iran as well. The EU can promote a more effective burden sharing and provide more support for humanitarian objectives in Syria. It can also assist in resolving the crisis and participate in the future reconstruction of Syria. We also have the Transatlantic Alliance that has to develop a more consistent approach with regard or vis-a-vis Russia and what is the role that we envision for Russia in the European security architecture. The same, of course, goes for Turkey. And of course, some efforts to limit the Russian role in Europe, they have often been inconsistent and also counterproductive, because they have provoked to an extent a Russian-Turkish rapprochement. And finally, the EU should have a coherent continental unification strategy, which is based on a framework for normative and geopolitical inclusion of Turkey and Russia. In my mind, if we reach the point where we once again have some commonly accepted rules of the game between the three sides, this is going to be, it's not going to be easy. It's definitely not an easy, it is a very challenging task, but I feel that it is what we need if we want stability with our two biggest eastern neighbors, that is Turkey and Russia. So that's it from me. Thanks.
Thank you, Evren and Constantinos, for the presentations. As far as I hear from both papers, we heard interesting insights and recommendations. As our experts underlined, Turkish-EU relations have enormous potential for cooperation, actually, but so far the conflictual track has been chosen. There are common problems and common interests, so actually we need to prevail this common interest and common problems in our relations, but disagreements continue. Hopefully the models recommended here provide a framework for the future EU-Turkey relations. Now we have abundant of time for the question and answers. So far we have one question here. I will read these questions. It's for Constantinos and Evren mostly. But in the meantime, if our audience has questions, please write the question and answer box or a chat box. Okay, an anonymous attendee asked, how's ongoing developments in Ukraine, Black Sea and Istanbul Canal project affect Turkey-Russia competitive relations given the rise of military interaction between both actors in the region? Is direct war between Turkey, NATO and Russia is inevitable? Okay, Evren, would you like to start? Or Constantinos?
The competitive dynamic between Russia and Turkey has always been present in the Black Sea, and lots of problems really with regard to the Black Sea. And this has been going on not only in the last decade, but ever since the end of the Cold War. Moscow have faced competition from Turkey, which was basically embarked as a strategy to cultivate its relationship with the Turkic populations in the post-Soviet political sphere, or Muslim majority countries, I'm sorry. This includes Ukraine as well, but that competitive dynamic has also a bit of a cooperation dynamic too. For example, Turkey didn't join EU sanctions with regard to the Ukraine, and thought that the EU has been really playing tough on Russia. And I mean, I can come up with many other examples, but the end result is that Turkey is basically following the same strategy as it has been following in the other regions as well, to balance Russia by its transatlantic alliance. And this is more prevalent in the case of Black Sea. And Russia is basically perceiving threat with the NATO enlargement and presence of NATO in the Black Sea, maybe more than any other location, because Black Sea's proximity to the Russia means a lot to the Russian security. It is very important to project its power into the wider Mediterranean region. It's an important trade and transportation artery for Russia. So Black Sea is maybe the most important geographical location, probably for Russia, and also for Turkish-Russian bilateral relationship. And Turkey didn't want NATO to be much present in the Black Sea, or EU much present in the Black Sea. Up until, you know, like very recently, but given that the balance of power has definitely shifted towards Russia, this also began to change for Turkey as well. So to cut the long story short, I do think that I don't think there is, you know, like the possibility of a hot war between NATO, Russia, and Turkey in the Black Sea, but it certainly is going to be continue to be a very conflictual region, specifically with the developments in Ukraine and Turkey's cultivating its relationship with Ukraine very recently, Turkey-Ukraine rapprochement I'm referring to, and the military security cooperation agreement that the two countries have signed very recently. That's it, I guess.
Thank you. Constantinos?
Well, I subscribe to what Evren has just said. Let me add a couple of ideas. First, it is superficial, to say the least, to read and listen to circles saying that Turkey is becoming Russia's Trojan horse in NATO. But at the same time, it is as extreme to claim or to feel or to hope that Turkey is going to compete with Russia as it did in the 90s or even before, during the Cold War years. It seems to me that Moscow and Ankara have reached a strategic understanding, not a strategic relationship. They have not developed the relationship to that extent, but they have reached a strategic understanding. They're both annoyed and disappointed by the West. They both feel that the West lacks an understanding towards their sensitivities, towards their interests. They both feel that the West has intervened in their immediate neighborhood in areas of special interest to both countries. And as I said at the very beginning, they both feel that the West is in decline, and that it is now the time for Russia and Turkey to promote more effectively their interests. But I don't think Evren very correctly put it. They are not only competing, but they're also cooperating in the Black Sea and vice versa. So it's a relationship that cannot be characterized with one word. On the other hand, of course, I'm trying to think, and let me know if I miss something. Which other NATO member is closer to Russia than Turkey? I frankly can't find another NATO member which cooperates with Russia despite their differences in Syria, has acquired, of course, the S-400, is about to build a nuclear power plant in its soil, and some other areas of cooperation where they have enhanced their cooperation. So it seems to me that, as I said before, and I'm going to close with that, they have reached, and of course, it's a matter of the good chemistry between the two leaders. We are talking about two personalities which, of course, affect the course of events. They affect and they influence foreign policy to a big extent. But irrespective of that, I think that now Russia and Turkey have reached this strategic understanding that we agree that we can disagree, but still do not let these disagreements damage our ties.
Thank you, Constantinos. And also let me remind that we have another thematic paper in this research project about the Black Sea and its effect on the EU-Turkey relations. So we will be presenting a paper particularly focusing on the Black Sea by the end of the summer. So just a reminder. We have another question to Evren. Do you think that NATO enlargement on the Eastern Europe, Georgia, and Ukraine pushed Russia to intervene on the Syrian civil war?
Well, it certainly did, but it's not the only factor. Russia did not intervene to Syria only to balance NATO enlargement in Eastern Europe. It has been a factor because it's basically more of a regional balance of power, and by intervening to Syria, Russia thought that it would tilt the balance of power against the West. That is definitely a factor, but there are also many other factors. As I said in the beginning of my presentation, the rise of Islamic transnationalism, which Russia sees a major ontological threat to its territorial integrity, domestic consolidation, and majority of the foreign fighters that are traveling to Syria has been from the post-Soviet states and including Russia. So these foreign fighters coming back has really created the possibility of these foreign fighters traveling to Russia, getting radicalized there, and coming back has one of the major security concerns of Russia, similar to Turkey's Kurdish concern. That I think really shaped Russia's response. And also there has been historical ties between Assad and Russia, trade ties, energy ties, security ties, military training, lots of ties. So they are basically allies, and that was an important part. And as I said, one of the other important factors is Russia really wants to go back to this idea of 1945, where we have fixed borders, and the Western actors pretty much do not intervene to change the borders, specifically in the region that Russia is located. I mean, in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, again sees this as a major security threat. And what happened in Libya really created a lot of frustration in the Russian security institutions and security elite, and they wanted not to repeat the same thing or prevent the repetition of the same thing in Syria, and keep this Syrian state as intact. And this sovereignty principle, territorial integrity principle is very crucial for the Russian security culture. This is what drives Turkey and Russia together too, because it's a very important Sarkisian principle of Turkey's security culture too. And with this, you know, like Western interventionism, humanitarian interventionism, responsibility to protect, all these concepts really touched to the nerves of the states, and they really wanted the West out of Russia. They thought that the Western intentions basically very much hypocritical, and they are basically following their own interests. So I can go on. I mean, in terms of the trade routes and the Russia's presence in the Mediterranean, Russia's presence in Africa, Syria has been geopolitically very important. So for all these reasons, Russia intervened to Syria, not just to counterbalance NATO's Eastern European enlargement.
Thank you. Actually, this Russia, EU, Turkey triangle attracted very interest. So we have 3 more questions.
May I add something?
Sure, please.
Thank you. Again, I fully agree with Evren. And of course, it's the Tartus naval base of Russia. She referred to that indirectly, which was, of course, one of the reasons, but she described very thoroughly why Russia decided to intervene in Syria. She spoke about Western interventionism and how Libya was regarded. Actually, it was a turning point for Russia. What happened in Libya and what they did not prevent from happening in Libya, how this influenced Russian actions in Syria. Let me just make a point here very briefly. The Russians claim that they have been asked by the internationally recognized government of Assad to intervene, so their intervention in Syria is legal. The same argument is used by Turkey in the case of Libya, that we are asked by the government of Tripoli, which is the internationally recognized government, to support them, and this is what we've been doing. So we are not intervening in the way the Westerners have done it in the past. Just that comment.
Thank you. Very interesting comments. So we have one question from our project leader, one of the project leaders, Dimitrios. This question is all 4 speakers. And then we have 2 more questions to Constantinos and Evren. So I'm reading the Dimitrios question. There seems to be a linkage between the approach between Turkey and Russia towards the EU West and the Turkey and Great Britain approach towards the EU. Both relationship, at least from Ankara's perspective, have a degree of compartmentalization in their approach. In order for the Turkey-Russia tandem and the Turkey-Britain tandem to strengthen their hand vis-a-vis the EU West. The only difference between the 2 binary relationship is that while there are strategic interests dividing Ankara and Moscow, there is no strategic competition between Ankara and London, as might be the case between Ankara and Paris. Do you agree? Can this approach be successful or further distance Turkey from the EU? This question is addressed to all 4 presenters. So I'm reading the other 2 questions, Russia questions, and then I'll give the floor to the speakers. An anonymous attendee asking, do you consider that the West accommodation of the triangle is feasible? Given the Biden administration's rhetoric on Russia, is there a room for any genuine dialogue on substantive issues? Maybe the answers to such questions might become more apparent going forward, including after the NATO and the US-EU summits over the next week. The last questions from Alexandros Apostolidis. Evren, taking into consideration the obvious disagreement of the institutional establishment of Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs with a more closer relationship with Putin's Russia, in expense of Turkey's alliance with its Western partners, NATO, EU, can you see Russian-Ukrainian conflict in Black Sea region to be used as a pretext for cooling off between Erdogan's Turkey and Russia? Okay, let's start with Harry, then Çiğdem, answering Dimitri's question, and then turn back to Evren and Constantinos.
Harry, your microphone is off.
Sorry, forgot. Right, I think there are some similarities, yes. But I think the Turkey-Russian relationship is more dangerous. And the UK is part of the West. It's not in the EU, but it will cooperate with the EU. It's part of this community of values, the liberal community of values. Whereas Russia is not. So to some extent, the Turkey-Russia relationship is also two people who moved away from the best version, let's say, of a democratic regime that preserves human rights. And therefore, they both have problems, similar to some extent, problems with the West. And thus, that's a more dangerous relationship for Turkey's prospects towards joining the EU, that's what I mean. Whereas the Turkey-UK relationship does not have such a dangerous aspect.
In terms of relations with Turkey and UK, well, UK has been seen as an ally in the European Union as well. So Turkey's supporter for the membership and so on. So when Brexit happened, closer relations with the between Turkey and UK are portrayed as a way to further the cooperation with the European Union. It's not going away from the European Union, but coming closer to the European Union. So since there's no strategic competition, in fact, when we look at the statements of the ministries, especially foreign affairs, we are seeing that there are possibilities of more cooperation in the neighborhood. So it is seen as a possible way to get closer to the European Union in the future relations.
Thank you, Evren, and then Constantinos.
I forgot my mic open. To very briefly answer from a perspective, I mean, let me put differently. I mean, all the three questions pretty much, I think, focus on a similar issue, and I think that's really depends on the answer of two major questions. The first question is, how much autonomy for Turkish foreign policy can the European Union or the transatlantic alliance can tolerate? So this is very important because there is no going back in that regard. And there was a question about this this fissure between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Turkey's government in terms of Turkey-Russian rapprochement. But as I have been mentioning and underlying, and we have mentioned in the paper too, this rapprochement is basically as a result of Turkey's need for more autonomy and to balance the other axes and to become more powerful and this and that. So that basic redefinition of Turkey's interest or foreign policy is basically shared with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or with the different opposition parties. Everyone thinks that, I mean, not everyone, but it's a common perception that Turkey needs more autonomy, Turkey has to be more powerful and this and that. So if that autonomy requires a rapprochement with Russia or more collaboration with Russia, that would happen, right? But as I have been also saying that this relationship is not without thorns, not without problems, and these problems and these competitive dynamics will remain there. But the question, if we go back to the question between EU and Turkey, the major question is that how much of that autonomy can the West tolerate in Turkish foreign policy? And that is practically, can Turkey buy S-400s and gets unpunished? And you can keep asking similar questions. I mean, how much collaboration? As it is, in with regard to two major issues of the European security perceptions, which is refugees and which is Islamic transnationalism, that collaboration is actually successful and helpful. I mean, in a sense, because it counters the refugees, right, Turkey, and it also is basically really organizes the Islamic transnationalism sort of in Syria and keeps it in Syria. And that is an important part. The second thing is that, and this is related to that EU security perception, how much collaboration can the EU provide to Turkey? If it does not tolerate autonomy, then it has to provide some sort of security, right? Or collaboration in terms of the refugees, more collaboration Turkey needs, in terms of its presence in Idlib and humanitarian crisis in Idlib, that's one of our recommendations in the paper, and in terms of its Turkey's or let me say in terms of Kurdish transnationalism. So these are the major problems of Turkey, and Turkey thinks that EU or the West is not very much present, and in fact counteracts against the Turkey's interests.
Thank you, Constantinos.
It's a mute.
Again, very briefly, as I have been covered by the previous speakers, no, I don't think that Ukraine can cool relations between Russia and Turkey. More things need to happen if this is going to take place, but I don't think that it is intended by any of the two sides to cool the relations. On the contrary, Evren said it in her prologue. Both sides, of course, use their relationship as a tool to put pressure on the West, and of course, the West feels that the more it marginalizes Turkey, the closer Turkey gets to Russia, which does not automatically happen. But of course, this is, I think, the mindset and the approach by many in the West. And the more they marginalize Russia, the closer Russia gets to China. So it's of course a matter of tactics, but a matter of strategy as well. And I feel that nowadays all sides lack a clear and consistent strategy as to how to deal with each other. They more focus on tactical maneuvers rather than having a clear-cut strategy as to how, as I said before, they envision their relations and, of course, their positions worldwide. A last comment on EU-Russia, EU-Turkey, especially EU-Russia. I think that West Russia, because one of the attendants spoke about Biden and how the US presidency might affect the course of events. What I would like to stress here is that things, and of course international affairs, are not monolithic. What does that mean? It means that, yes, there are areas of rivalry between the US and Russia. There are also areas of competition, but there are also areas of cooperation. So it is not a one-sided approach that we are only going to have competition between the US and Russia. I think that as it goes with China, the same is with Russia on behalf of the US areas of rivalry, areas of competition, areas of cooperation.
Thank you for your answers. With these answers, we have answered all the questions on the chat box. And now it's time for closing up. Let me thank our speakers for presenting their research and to our audience for questions and listening to us. Our next research seminar will be next week on Thursday. So next week we will be talking about two major issues in Turkish-EU relations, namely Cyprus and energy relations. Please stay tuned. Thank you.